Welcome. Today, I'm going to explain the Bible footnotes about John 7:53 through 8:11 that state that in some manuscripts, the story about the adulteress is found after John 7:36 and after John 7:44, after John 21:25, and after Luke 21:38. Why is the passage in these other locations? A second question, why is it that the footnote does not mention that about 1,500 Greek manuscripts have the passage? Many readers may suspect that whoever made the footnote that mentions the movement of these 12 verses intended for that footnote to be a platform or a launch pad for the theory that the passage was once floating around on its own. That claim was made popular by Bruce Metzger in an obsolete text critical handbook, and writers such as Daniel Wallace have continued to promote it. It was recently rephrased by Dr. Michael Kruger of the Reformed Theological Seminary. The story moves around within the gospel tradition, he said. When there's a story that can't find a real safe home, and in the textual tradition is kind of hopping around and kind of homeless, that's usually a sign that it's had a problem with its authenticity from the start, because scribes just don't know quite what to do with it. In the next 15 minutes, I'm going to test that claim and demonstrate that it is false. Let's begin by considering the manuscripts that have the passage after John 7:36. How many such manuscripts are there? 1,500? 150? 15? No. The answer is 2. And they're not particularly old. Now, if you're already familiar with the contours of the Pentecost reading in the Byzantine lectionary, you've probably already deduced why a couple of copyists placed the passage about the adulteress before John 7:37. For everyone else, let me explain. The election for Pentecost, the feast day that celebrates the coming of the Holy Spirit in Acts chapter 2, consisted of John 7:37 through 52 combined with John 8:12. This is to be read by a lector, the designated scripture reader, in the church services. This meant, before the development of lectionaries, which present the readings individually, it meant the lector would read from a manuscript of the Gospels and begin reading on Pentecost at John 7:37 and continue reading to the end of verse 52, and then jump ahead and read chapter 8, verse 12. Many medieval manuscripts of the Gospels are equipped with supplemental material, charts in the front or back, and notes in the margins that make it possible to find the lection that was assigned for each day. And within the text, or in the nearby margin, symbols written in red represent the Greek words for start and stop, signifying where each lection started and where it stopped. Sometimes the election was not one continuous block of text, and in that case symbols for skip forward and resume here were also included. As a way to simplify the lector's task on Pentecost, 2 copyists moved John 7:53 through 8:11 backward in the text, so it would come right before the Pentecost lection. Consequently, in minuscules 2:25 and 11:28, we find these 12 verses between John 7:36 and John 7:37, or to put it another way, right before the beginning of the reading for Pentecost. It is instructive to look at another feature in minuscule 2:25. John 13:3 through 17 appears in its usual place, but it also appears in the text of Matthew 26. The reason, again, is to make things easier for the lector. In the Maundy-Thursday service, Matthew 26, 1 through 20, was followed in the liturgy by John 13:3 through 17. What we have here is a hybrid manuscript, a continuous text Gospels manuscript that's been partly reformatted to be used like a lectionary. We do not therefore question the authenticity of John 13:3 through 17 or suggest that it was a butterfly of a text. Neither should we sit in silence while commentators give a false impression that a liturgically motivated simplification of the Pentecost lection in 2 manuscripts implies that John 7:53 through 8:11 was once floating around. Next, why is the story about the adulteress found after John 7:44? Let's begin again by asking how many Greek manuscripts support this placement of the passage after John 7:44. And the answer is none. 0. 3 manuscripts have the passage after John 7:44, but we've really got to reach. None of these copies are written in Greek. They're written in Georgian. This is versional evidence. Okay, but still, how and why did it get there in these 3 medieval Georgian manuscripts? When I consulted an article by the late J. Neville Birdsall, who provided details about those copies, the answer became clear. The Georgian version initially did not have this passage in the text of John 7 and 8. But when the Georgian version was revised centuries later after it was initially made, the monks who revised it wanted to conform its text to their Greek manuscripts. At least one of those manuscripts had a text similar to what is found in the group of manuscripts known as Family 1. It says priests in verse 3 instead of scribes, and this happens to vaporize one of the major internal objections against the genuineness of the passage. Now, in the flagship manuscripts of the Family 1 group, the passage about the adulteress is found at the end of the Gospel of John. But there's more to the story. The passage is introduced by a note that goes like this: the chapter about the adulteress. In the Gospel of John, this does not appear in the majority of copies, nor is it commented upon by the Holy Fathers whose commentaries have been preserved, specifically by John Chrysostom and Cyril of Alexandria, nor is it taken up by Theodore of Mopsuestia and the others. For this reason, it was not kept at the place where it was found in a few copies, at the beginning of the 86th chapter, following "Search and see that out of Galilee a prophet does not arise." To emphasize, the note's author specifically says the passage was removed from its place after John 7:53 and was transferred to the end of the Gospel in light of its absence in most copies and in consideration of venerable commentators' non-use of it. So, someone revising the Georgian text saw the story about the adulteress at the end of the Gospel of John in his master copy. He also saw a note saying that before it was put there, it was found in the text at the beginning of section 86. Now, these aren't all chapters, these are the Eusebian sections. So that's where he inserted it, either not having or not understanding the rest of the note. And where does the 86th Eusebian section begin? Right here where John 7:45 begins, or to put it another way, right after John 7:44. So the Georgian evidence is not evidence that the pericope adulterae was floating. Instead, we observe a specific sequence of events, a direct line of cause and effect. These 3 Georgian manuscripts came after the format in Family 1, and the format in Family 1 came after the form in which the passage was found after John 7:52. Now that we've already described the note that accompanies the passage in the leading members of Family 1, it should be easy to see that the manuscripts with the passage at the end of John convey that the passage was previously found in a few manuscripts after John 7:52. It was not plucked from anywhere else. One other location for the passage about the adulteress is listed in the footnotes. In a small group of closely related manuscripts known as Family 13, the passage is found at the end of Luke 21. Why is it there? The basic reason why it was transferred to the end of Luke 21 is similar to the reason why it was moved to John 7:37, to simplify things for the lector. But in this case, a different part of the lectionary was involved. Not the synaxarion, which works in an annual cycle that restarts at Easter, but the menologion, the annual cycle that consists of feast days for specific days in the calendar year. In that part of the lectionary, October 7th is the feast day for Saints Sergius and Bacchus, and the Gospel reading in their honor is Luke 21:12 through 19. And in Manuscript 13, in the text of Luke 21, we see the marks that signify the beginning and end of that lection. Most of the rest of Luke 21 is assigned to be read in the other part of the lectionary for the Saturday before Lent, Carnival Saturday. Other portions are assigned to be read in the 12th week after Easter. The nearest place where one could insert a lection without disrupting the narrative or making things complicated for the lector is at the end of the chapter. What happened in the ancestor manuscript of Family 13 is that a copyist who knew that John 7:53 through 8:11 was not used in the Synaxarion also knew that this passage, or most of it, was to be read in the Menologion. John 8:3 through 11 was the lection for St. Pelagia's Day, October the 8th. So the copyist moved the text that was skipped on Pentecost into the text of Luke, close to the reading for the previous day for the convenience of the lector. It seems extremely unlikely that anyone would just happen to place the passage that contains the Menologian's lection for October 8th so close to the Menologian's lection for October 7th. In this respect, the Family 13 manuscripts are hybrids of continuous text copies of the Gospels and Gospel lectionaries. The transfer of the passage to this location at the end of Luke 21 is a side effect of the development of a Menologian cycle in which the lection for Sergius and Bacchus was read on October 7th, and the lection for Pelagia was read on October the 8th. Before I conclude, let's cover one other case in which the passage is sometimes said to have been transferred to a different location. Minuscule 1333 does not have John 7:53 through 8:11 following John 7:52. But when that manuscript was made, space was left blank on the page that comes after the page in which the text of Luke concludes, before the chapter list for John began on the next page. Someone used that space to add the lection for St. Pelagia's feast day. That's exactly what we see there in Minuscule 1333. This is not the whole passage, just verses 3 through 11 of chapter 8. A title is there with the text. A title says the passage is excerpted from John, and a faint note in the margin identifies the text as the reading to honor St. Pelagia. Everything about this says that the text on this page was copied from a lectionary. Minuscule 1333 itself supports non-inclusion of the pericope adulterae. All that the presence of John 8, 3 through 11 means at this place, and with this title, and with this note, is that someone wanted to read lections out of this manuscript, and one of the lections in the Menologian cycle that was used at his church was missing in this copy. So instead of attempting to cram it into the margin around the text of chapter 8, this person wrote it in a blank space. It's not placed there as if it's part of the text of Luke. It's clearly identified as an excerpt from the Gospel of John. Let's review 5 points. Number 1. The passage about the adulteress is found after John 7:52 in about 85% of the Greek copies of John. Its presence there is also confirmed by Old Latin evidence and the Vulgate. And Jerome says that it was found in many manuscripts of John in both Greek and Latin. Number 2. The movement of John 7:53 through 8:11 to precede John 7:37, where the Pentecost lection begins, is a simplification attested in 2 manuscripts designed to turn the lection for Pentecost into one uninterrupted block of text. Number 3. According to a note in the best representatives of a small group of manuscripts in which the passage about the adulteress appears after the end of the Gospel of John, the passage was moved there after it had been found after John 7:52 as part of Eusebian section 86 of the text of John. It was not floating around. Number 4. The insertion of John 7:53 through 8:11 between John 7:44 and 7:45 in 3 medieval Georgian manuscripts is the result of Georgian copyists' attempt to insert the passage into section 86 of the Georgian text. They just put it there at the very beginning of that section instead of after verse 52, being guided by a note similar to the one that we find in the Family 1 manuscripts. And number 5, the movement of John 7:53 through 8:11 to follow Luke 21:38 in the Family 13 manuscripts is a side effect of the non-use of the passage in the Synaxarion and its regular use in the Menologion. It follows the nearby lection for October 7th and contains the lection for October the 8th. The evidence overwhelmingly opposes the currently popular theory that the multiple locations of the passage about the adulteress imply that it is comparable to a fluttering butterfly or a piece of floating driftwood. It wasn't floating around. So when you read a book that claims that this passage was a floating tradition, draw a line through that false statement. Write a note in the margin of that book that says, this claim is not true. Tell future readers where they can find accurate information. Or, when an online apologist claims that the movement of these 12 verses is absolute evidence that they were not originally part of the Gospel of John, call up his radio show and courteously let him know, if you can get past the call screener, that the promotion of that claim is absolute evidence that he does not understand the manuscripts that he's looking at. When your professor says that the mobility of this passage indicates that it was hopping around, why don't you hop up on top of your desk and gently say there's a problem with the professor's claim, and after class explain to your fellow students why the professor is incorrect. Be respectful, but don't be timid. Be bold, and don't apologize for insisting that your professor should stop misrepresenting the implications of the evidence. Thank you for watching. May God bless your study of His Word.